there is no meaningful Indonesian brand that is going global. And I want to be the first one.
Can you turn a local brand from Indonesia into a truly global phenomenon? That's what Edward Tirtanata plans to do with his billion-dollar coffee brand. He started it here in Indonesia with just $15,000. But everything changed when he was able to convince Serena Williams, Jay-Z, and Sequoia, a leading venture capital fund in the United States, to invest in his food and beverage startup. Kopi Kenangan has since expanded into Singapore and other markets in the region, and now serves over 70 million cups of coffee every year. Edward has his eyes set on India as their next market, a land that prefers tea over coffee. I asked Edward what makes him think that the world is ready for Indonesian coffee. He built his brand based on a deep understanding of this country, its farmers, and its consumers. But can it really work beyond Southeast Asia? To find out, I wanted to try his special brew myself, so I asked Edward to make me a cup. Edward, you serve now, what is it, over 70 million cups of coffee every year. What makes Indonesian coffee special?
So I think for me personally, there is no such thing as the perfect coffee globally. Actually, Indonesian and the rest of Southeast Asian loves coffee. But unfortunately, there's a big missing gap in the market. For instance, I would say if you're doing a cup of coffee from Colombia or Brazil, it's not the tasting note that your typical Southeast Asian likes. Meaning that usually the tasting notes is more fruity, it's higher acidity, right? Whereas I think if you go to Indonesia and Southeast Asia, a good cup of coffee in here has a more chocolatey note.
So this, I mean, I can taste it now from the cup that you just brewed for us. It's this less acidity, more of a a chocolatey kind of a taste. This is kind of what makes the coffee different. And does it have like that flavor profile have a broader appeal than just here?
I would say that at least where we are today, right, in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, it definitely has the appeal, right? We are doing pretty well in all these three countries, right? We have 70 in Malaysia and Singapore now, and I would say that especially in Singapore, where the population is a lot more diverse, it's not just Southeast Asian. You see that there are a lot of, for example, European, Indians going to Singapore, and we can see as well that our customers are pretty diverse.
Diverse customer
and
base.
They do like it, and they tell me that, oh, okay, the coffee is not too acidic. And if I tell that to a coffee expert, they'll be like, wow, that's a crime, right? Acidity is good, but then at the end of the day, you just have to satisfy your customer. Customer first mentality. So that's why it's not about what I like or what coffee experts think is correct, but it's really all about what does your customer likes.
Any stories of you talking to actual customers that come to mind, where you've gotten feedback that is actually funneled into the product itself or the business itself?
Actually, first day of business in 2017 August, I talked to a lot of customers and I changed the recipe on the go.
Really?
Yeah.
On the fly?
Yeah, because back then, some of the customers who tried, because of the branding, they said, oh, this is way too bitter for me. And that's when I adjusted, actually, the calibration of the espresso, because I realized that, okay, I like my coffee to be very strong, actually. But then not a lot of customers like it to be bitter. They like it to be bold, but not as strong as what I liked it. So,
which is a very typical founder mistake in that we assume that the rest of the world must have similar taste or and similar needs, and so we design for ourselves, and then suddenly we take it to the market, and the market speaks.
Market speaks, yeah.
And so the founders who are successful are humble enough and nimble enough to be able to make the adjustments needed. And you took it next level by adjusting during operation.
Operation first day. So that's as nimble as it gets, actually.
I mean, that was...
well, my team back then was simply just myself, my co-founder, and 5 baristas. So they just follow.
The baristas must have been. This is a little bit of a different experience than the typical one.
Yeah.
So you started with like a $15,000 investment over 7 years ago, and you turned it into over $1 billion company, over 900 stores. How much of that was part of the strategy right from the beginning, or how much was it kind of testing out an idea and flying by the seat of your pants as you're going along?
So I would say that all the way until 2020, right, where I think we secured close to 137 million of funding, right? The idea never changed from day one until 2020, where we see a big missing gap in the market between instant coffee and freshly brewed cafe like Starbucks. The missing gap is quite huge. Why? Because one cup of coffee back then in 2017 is around 40 to 50,000 rupiah. Say 40,000 times 30 days is 1.2 million rupiah, or 1/3 of minimum wage.
1/3 of the minimum wage to have a coffee.
To have a coffee. So there's no way that is affordable. And actually, upon further research, we came across this thing called Starbucks Tall Latte Index.
Okay.
So not many people knew this, and I know this in 2021 actually.
I'm aware of the Big Mac Index.
Big Mac
yes,
Index,
right? But there's a Starbucks one.
Tall Latte Index. So basically, they compare the price of tall latte to your daily income. And what we know is that from that index is that Indonesia have the 9th most unaffordable tall latte in the world, right? Wow. For example, I think in the US it's only 1% of daily income, but in Indonesia it's like 20 to 30%. So there's no way that people can drink that every day. So that's why I created Kopi Kenangan.
Yeah. So when was the point at which you thought that, you know what, this big dream that's actually might be happening?
When we first opened the outlet, day one, right?
Yeah.
I told to my partner, I think we'll be lucky to sell 100 cups. But then in the first day alone, we were able to sell close to 700 cups.
Whoa.
In the first day alone.
700 cups in one day.
And I'll tell you why. We are actually beside Coffee Bean, Starbucks, and a convenience store that is selling coffee, plus a lot of street side vendor outside, right?
So you were in the center of all the competition. Global player, local player, convenience
cheaper
store,
than us,
cheaper,
right?
more expensive, everything.
Yeah, but people were saying that, oh wow, this tastes better than Starbucks, but it's half the price. So because it's not necessarily better, but then it's actually more relevant,
more suited
for the market that I am in. The fact that we can open near a Starbucks, we know that expansion will be very easy. Why? Just open near Starbucks. It's as simple as that. There's no real estate, there's no strategy, there's no data. Just open near a Starbucks. And so,
but still, I mean, 700 in day one means that you were able to get the word out or something.
It's actually number one is the branding. So back then, most cafe call their cafe with something along the line of coffee. Or with a Western name like Common Ground, 115, etc., etc. But then I realized that if you want to penetrate Indonesia, you need to be localized. You need to look different. I do believe that the next Starbucks is not going to look like a Starbucks. The next Google is not going to look like a Google. You need to be differentiated from everything, from the business model, from the product, all the way to the branding as well. And actually back then with 15K of equity, we really don't have money for marketing, right? So we need to differentiate ourselves with the branding.
Yeah.
So Kopi Kenangan translate into coffee memory, and then because I thought it sounds nice in Bahasa, and then it
has a nice ring to it.
It has Kopi Kenangan. It has a nice ring to it. And then I thought to myself, okay, what memory is actually most memorable for you? And that's why our number one bestseller until today is called Kopi Kenangan Mantan, which translates into my ex-girlfriend's memory. So it was an instant success because people were laughing at the cashier. They were like, what is this? This is like
what's the backstory there?
The definition back then, I think, was something along the line of sweet memory that is no longer there. But sometimes it just pops into your mind. It sounds better in Bahasa.
Yeah, okay.
It's funnier in Bahasa, but then it's meant to be funny. And that's why people started posting on Instagram, oh wow, this coffee tastes like my ex-girlfriend. Sweet in the beginning and bitter at the end. I was like, yeah, so it was very viral. That virality, keeps us going until today.
If you go back all the way to the beginning, did you have Pan-Asian or beyond ambitions? And did you think about what the impact would be of picking a name that's in Bahasa? So
back then, I didn't really have the Pan-Asian vision.
Yeah.
I just thought that I want to become the number one coffee chain in Indonesia. That's it. But then, after a year or two, I realized that Indonesia is actually the 4th largest exporter of coffee. But we export coffee as a commodity. We don't export coffee as a brand. And that's when I realized as well, if you wanna, make Indonesia progress, if you wanna make people know more about Indonesia more than just Bali, you need to do it through one of the medium is through food. How people know Thailand so much is because there's a lot of Thai restaurants everywhere, right? And it makes people want to go to Thailand. And it's the same with Indonesian as well. There is no meaningful Indonesian brand that is going global. And I want to be the first one.
So let's talk about that. Part of the entrepreneurship course I teach at London Business School, we actually look at how to enter into a market. And there's a traditional way of looking at things, which is more of a strategic framework of saying, okay, what is the market like, the competition, the supplier power, buyer power, all of these types of things come together in order to make that assessment. And in fact, we looked at Starbucks as one of the examples. On one hand, you could say, for you were entering into a market where there were these big global players like Starbucks and others, and then there were also small, little shops that were competing. So it might not have been immediately apparent that this as an industry would be the smartest industry to get into. What was your differentiator and what did you choose strategically as the dimensions that you were going to focus on?
Actually, take a step back, right?
Yeah.
On Starbucks, actually they pride themselves on being consistent across different markets. So the taste of tall latte in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia all taste the same. But then for us, we really believe in going hyper local, meaning that we adjust to the market. And in this case, when we take a look at the market, right, using that daily income, we realize that I think the best price point is below 20,000 rupiah. And from there, we try to create a recipe where I would say that it suits the market, suits the taste palette, or based on what I know about Indonesia. Now I think we are a lot more sophisticated than that. We actually do an FGD, multiple FGD.
What's FGD?
Focus group discussion.
A focus group discussion.
Yeah,
so you gather people around to be able to understand exactly what.
What do they want? At the end of the day, coffee is about how bold you want your coffee, how sweet you want your coffee. Because coffee in Southeast Asia is not Americano. And the same goes for Starbucks as well. 95% of our sales is usually milky drinks, milky sweet drink. And that's why I don't focus on Americano or black coffee. I try to focus on the sweet, milky, creamy beverages.
So taste is one of the dimensions which is really important. So and like hyper-localizing that taste that you came in. Are there other areas that you wanted to differentiate yourself on when you were entering into this market?
The format is very different.
The format.
Starbucks is the third home. We are more like a grab and go format, meaning that our first store is only 12 meters square in space, or 120 square feet. So it's very small for Starbucks standard.
Yeah.
It's most coffee shop, their bar is 20 meters square. But then I try to design it in such a way that is very efficient, right? Because it's small, I can enter locations that cafe could not enter. For example, we are the #1 gas station player in Indonesia by far. Even if you compare with QSR, we are by far the #1 after convenience stores. We have close to 200 stores just in gas station because our concept is small, right?
Right, it fits.
It fits. And then it's not just the size as well. Another thing that is different is how we leverage technology. Because we know usually in QSR or in cafe, the bigger you are, the bigger your revenue.
The quick service restaurants?
Quick service restaurant like McDonald's, Wendy's, and more. In this case, we try to make our outlet to be small, but then we leverage technology to make people go into our store. So people order digitally.
The way that I teach this topic of kind of disrupting an existing industry in business school, we talk about a concept called value curves, and it's actually thinking about, from a consumer perspective, what are all the variables that are really important to them or that they're weighing, right? So you mentioned several of them, right? Which was the ambiance, for instance, of a place, its availability, consistency, tech-driven. All of these things might be plotted on an axis, and then the extent to which you actually care about them or you're competing using them is on another axis. So then you can visually see what the landscape is, and you can imagine like a Starbucks would have that consistency and third space and all this, whereas you're playing in a different field and almost creating your own market, which is an exciting proposition. You sold this story quite well. I mean, as you're trying to expand, you got on some really interesting investors, everybody from Facebook co-founder Edward Tirtanata, to Jay-Z and Serena Williams, and even Sequoia Capital, which is a venture capital fund in the Silicon Valley that backed everything from Apple to Google to PayPal to Airbnb and all these tech companies. How were you able to convince Sequoia to invest in an F&B play? I mean, from my experience with them, it would be very hard to get them to invest in something like that in the US. So what made them so excited about this opportunity?
At the end of the day, every investor, celebrity, VC, or PE, they are all attracted to one thing, which is growth, right? And back then, in 2017, I had 1 store. And then next year, I have 58 stores. And then in 2019, I was on track to have 229. So looking at that, obviously I keep on, that was a quadruple, right? And throughout COVID, I actually quadruple again to 800.
In COVID?
During COVID. So I was 200, 2019. Throughout COVID, I had 800. So, that is why people knows that we have a lot of room to grow and we're growing pretty rapidly as well. Therefore, all these investors are very much attracted to our profile. And keep in mind, we are growing not just for the sake of growth, but we are growing profitably as well.
A lot of times, especially in the heyday of just raising venture capital and growing at all costs, investors were not so keen on looking at actually, are you making money? They just want, are you growing?
Yeah.
So tell us about how you were able to make the economics of each cup that you're selling profitable. What were the techniques that you used in order to do that?
So at the end of the day, any retail has the similar cost structure, right? Be it in coffee or fashion, which is number one, you have revenue minus COGS minus rent and labor.
Which is the cost of goods sold.
Yeah, COGS, cost of goods sold, rent, labor. It's simple. That's the 3 biggest component to cost. We know that if we want to sell high quality coffee at an affordable price, we need to work with a higher COGS than most. Like for example, I believe global coffee chain has 20 to 30% COGS. We had 40 back then.
So your costs were actually higher.
My cost was actually higher. But I know by going small, my costs in terms of rent and labor will be a lot smaller than most. And then in a good store, in our best store actually that are selling like around 1,500 cups per day, we only need 12 people. So that's a lot less than global average. I think
since 2022, you've expanded internationally to Malaysia, to the Philippines, to
Singapore.
And Singapore as well. In the beginning, it wasn't a profitable expansion. Have you been able to turn that around? What made it so challenging to get the thing rolling?
At the end of the day, in retail, you need to open 1 store at a time. Therefore, if you don't have enough scale, most probably your operation could not cover headquarter costs or SG&A. So that's why in Malaysia and Singapore, we only had 5 during the first year. It could not cover the great talent that we have in both Singapore and Malaysia. But then now, today, we have 70 stores across Singapore and Malaysia. Those 2 businesses are very profitable for us. In fact, the payback period for Malaysia is even better than Indonesia today because their revenue is double that of Indonesia. So we are very happy to start in those 2 countries. But we know for the first 2 years of opening any businesses, it would not be a profitable endeavor.
And what data do you monitor? I mean, what's important to you to be on top of, especially as you're trying to understand a new market?
Any businesses in the world, it all comes down to how many transactions you do times price, right? So for us, the most important is ADT, or average daily transaction.
Average daily transaction.
So those are the 2 main metrics we track: is ADT, average daily transaction, and AT, average ticket.
So how many coffees each store is selling, and then how much on average are you charging per coffee?
Sure. So basically, I would say that during opening, it needs to go above 200 ADT. And for some reason, any market that we enter, the average ticket is always equivalent to 2 cups. It's interesting. I didn't plan it, but then every market that we're in is always 2 cups.
So the value you're saying of the average ticket, so the average order will probably be about 2 cups.
2 cups.
And you need about 200 cups, or 200,
when
orders.
we enter a new market, because you have a new honeymoon period, people want to try new things, right? It's a phenomenon everywhere globally. But then steady state, it should be around 150 ADT, or 150 transaction times 2 cups, or 300 cups per day per store. So those would be a good profitable market for us if they are able to achieve such metrics. Yeah.
You're launching into India and first store Delhi, thinking about that market as an opportunity, but at the same time, it also has some challenging dynamics, right? The international players, chaiwalas and small players. What made you believe that India would be a great next expansion?
So I think first and foremost, any market that we enter, it is always hyper competitive. Any random Joe can open a cafe, right? So therefore, when we planning to enter into India, we have to see the state of the market first. And we realize actually in India, there's the same like Indonesia, there's a big missing gap in the market between affordable coffee and your global coffee chain. And keep in mind, I think the GDP per capita of India is almost half that of Indonesia. So that's when we realize, okay, the missing gap is even bigger in India. And then, given that we have a localization strategy, we make our menu based on the Indian taste palette compared to global chain that is using their menu the same across different countries. We believe that we have an edge, right? And actually, one more interesting thing about India, we realized that a lot of the cafe there Indianized their food a bit too late. So cafe needs to sell food as well. And we realized that Starbucks, when they first launched, they just have croissant, quiche, the normal sandwich. But then after 10 years, they start to Indianize their croissant, meaning it will have like chicken tikka inside your croissant, or cheese, cottage cheese inside your sandwich, something like that. It's very important. That's why in McDonald's, their number one bestseller is Maharaja Mac, which is an Indianized burger. Right, so I think we realized that we need to localize from day one.
How does an Indonesian company localize in India?
We pick beans where Indian like based on FGD, so it's data driven. So basically, we gather around 100, 200 people. We blind taste them, no brand, unbranded, and we ask them, do you like it? If yes, why? And then usually, if the acceptance rates of the first two boxes is above 85%, then it's good to go.
On India, did you fly there, get a sense of the market? If you could tell me kind of your impression of being on the ground, maybe something surprising about that market that you had to see with your own eyes.
Two things that stood out for me. Number one, the traffic is bad. It's really bad.
Worse than Jakarta?
It's worse than Jakarta. Yes, and another thing is that I realized modern retail is really non-existent in India, at least compared to Indonesia. How I know is quite simple. I was trying to buy some tissue and snack and water for myself, and there is no convenience store around. In Indonesia, you have Indo and Alfamart, which has around 40,000 outlets. In India, there is no convenience store chain. And cafe is generally not on the side of the road, but it's usually inside a complex, inside an office, or inside a mall. So that's when I realized that I think digital becomes even more important in India, especially food delivery. That is why if you see Zomato and Swiggy, they're doing a lot better than say Gojek or Grab in Southeast Asia, simply because people prefer to order online using their phone to get your tikka masala or your chai or your coffee delivered to your doorstep. So that's when we realized it's important to do that. Yeah.
Tell me about your tech strategy in India.
So in India, I would say that our tech strategy is pretty much similar across different markets. We'll have an app that I would say that in terms of the UI UX is one of the better one globally. We have close to 1 million MAU, monthly active user in Southeast Asia. And in India, which I would argue that is more digitally savvy than Southeast Asia, it becomes a lot more important for us to have the app and make sure that it's there from day one, and make sure that it can deliver your coffee to your doorstep as well.
To what extent do you actually design the application experience based on the local needs in a new market that you're expanding into?
So we always iterate the app. For example, in Indonesia, we have two people who are a UI UX researcher. What they do is simple, just talk to people, talk as many users as possible, and making sure that this is something that they like. So interestingly, in Indonesia, they are more interested to know where the promo is and make sure that it's highly accessible. Whereas if you go to Malaysia and Singapore, you'll notice the app is a lot more sleek, a lot more minimalist, and is more geared towards people who just want a simple ordering. Because that is what people want. The UX researcher went there and talked to them as well. But of course, as mentioned, it takes months of iteration for us. That's why our app, if you see, version 1.0 under the version today, it looks vastly different between 2019 and today.
In any case, always launch quickly, iterate, see what the reaction is in the market, and so you're
Yes.
playing that out in each market. So it seems that you've really designed it with the ease and speed in mind, and then iterated along the way. Which, when we talk about how do you launch, or even how do you even start a new company, a lot of people are worried about, what is it going to be like? Maybe it's not perfectly designed for the the Indian market, and so wasting months and months and months of time. Whereas you can just launch quickly and then get the feedback and iterate, which it sounds like that's the approach.
In entrepreneurship, I always say just do it, like Nike. It's, you don't need to overcomplicate and think. You just need to iterate and talk to your customer. And just do it.
And what has Kopi Kenangan done to address topics in this sphere?
So I would say that in terms of coffee, actually coffee is at an all-time high today. I think
all-time high.
I think in terms of price.
In terms of price.
Yeah, because green bean price, if you buy from farmer January versus today, it almost doubled actually. Simply because of climate change, right? It's a real issue. There's not enough rain for a good harvest. And then on top of that, interestingly, is in Bloomberg actually, one of the reasons why coffee price went up is because of durian.
Durian?
Durian, yeah. Basically,
the stinky fruit.
The stinky fruit, simply because farmers in Vietnam feels durian gives you better yield than coffee. So as a result, they just change all their plantation to durian.
They switch from coffee to durian.
To durian, yeah. So that's why right now, yes, sustainability becomes an issue. I would say sustainability not just in terms of ESG, but then in terms of can we have good quality coffee for extended period of time in the future. So that is why right now we are starting to go to farmers, right? Make sure there's traceability. Granted that we just started our ESG journey. It's called Kenangan Baik actually, and hopefully by starting from next year, we'll have good traceability of our source, and we want to make sure there is fair trade as well.
Have you had a chance to be able to actually visit some of these farms or speak with these actual farmers?
Our head of coffee usually frequently travel to farmers and make sure that we help the farmers so that they can have a better yield. Because better yield for us is better for us as well, right?
And so are you helping the farmers actually
in
improving what they even do?
And we even went beyond that. In Flores, where we really love the coffee beans from there, we even help them with water. Because a lot of these farmers don't even have basic needs like water. They need to travel, a kilometer away just to get, clean water, right? So we had this project where we drill and get water sources for them. It's a well project.
Drilling wells.
Yeah, drilling wells for them, and we are happy that I think we have quite a lot of wells in the area, and we want to make sure that they have their basic needs provided. It doesn't really relate to their farms, but then we want to help their daily lives, right?
It sounds like a relationship that you're building, something
Yes.
that is deeper than just transactional. No, I think one of the striking points of your journey and your story is these examples of being able to do good while also building a big, sustainable and serious business. Combining between the two is more unique these days. People think that it's an either or. What's been your experience of, is it really a zero sum, as in I need to take in order to benefit, or do you look at things in more of an abundance mindset, as in as long as I give, it'll come back to me somehow?
Where if you make enough profit, I think a part of it needs to be given back. Granted that maybe it's not like Patagonia, where the earth is our only shareholder. Yes, we are not at that level.
Yeah, Patagonia gives quite a bit of money, right?
Yes, quite a bit of money. It's a very powerful thing that the founder did, where the earth is our shareholder.
Yes.
It's a very famous statement from them. But then for us, we do share a bit of our profit to make sure that especially the farmers who help Kopi Kenangan to be where it is today can benefit as well. From rebuilding school, making water well, renovating their toilets, those are small things that I think can be very meaningful to them.
What's one small change that could make a big sustainability impact in coffee?
Oh, interesting question. I would say that the biggest change that can be done in coffee is not necessarily on the coffee side of things, but I would say that it's actually on the packaging of coffee. Because keep in mind, even for global brands like Starbucks, Coffee Bean, Tim Horton, we all use a single-use plastic cup, right? So one of the initiatives that we did this year is to actually start changing those plastic to rPET, which is recycled PET, right?
Recycled
so we
plastic.
use plastic from recycled PET, right? To make
PET, the plastic.
the plastic, yeah. There's PET, there's PP, there's a lot of terms
Lots
for
of
it.
terminology,
Lot of
but it's
terminology.
basically recycled plastic.
We recycle plastic,
Yes.
just to keep it simple. And I think that will have a big impact to the environment, right? I think if coffee chain start looking into using recycled packaging, I think it will be very meaningful to the earth. Yeah.
So I understand that you've been developing your own AI assistant called Jarvan, inspired by Jarvis, which is Iron Man's butler, right?
Yeah.
What was the thinking behind that, and is there at what point did you realize this might be actually quite helpful for something that we need to get done?
Okay, so I think one of the thing that we realized in building 900 stores is that finding 900 good manager is just as challenging as building the stores, right?
Or more challenging.
Or even more challenging, I would say,
the people,
right? Yeah, finding
that.
that 900 people is very hard. You need to find one good manager a day. Think about it, it's very hard, right? So we want to make sure that a Kopi Kenangan store doesn't need to be run by a manager. In fact, out of those 900 stores, only half has a manager. Half doesn't have a manager.
Half of the stores have managers, and half are run by an
by
AI bot.
Not AI bot, I would say. So it's not AI yet. We are going towards that because the technology for generative AI is getting better and better. What does a manager do? What do? They need to make sure they follow the SOP, and then they order correctly to make sure that they can sell coffee, right? So basically, Jarvan helps them ensure that they follow the checklist properly.
Right, the standard operating procedure, so it's SOP.
SOP, right? And then number two, the system can help them do suggestive ordering to the warehouse. Okay, I think for the next 3 to 4 days, you need, 100 kilogram of coffee. So please order today.
Based on the trend
based on
of
the
what's
trend,
actually been happening in that store.
What's happening in that store. So that's what they do. So you don't need someone who's very experienced to know what to order, etc., etc. Basically, Jarvan does that for you. So only if the store has a high enough volume, then we start providing them with better manager, because obviously the complication is different if the store is doing very well.
So the baseline, you can use Jarvan to basically manage a store with some operators of the machines and selling, but between Jarvan and a few people, you can actually get a store going. And once it's been tested, and once you feel that there's higher potential, that's when you would put an actual manager.
Actual manager.
This is a tool to enable scalability.
Scalability, yes. And going forward, hopefully, as we get better using AI, we can actually implement real AI, and it can help empower our manager even better. We are not there yet.
I was going to ask you about AI. So what's your vision around how Jarvan can improve and become AI capable? What kinds of benefits do you think it'll bring to your business?
So basically, I think with the evolution of Gen AI, spearheaded by, I think, OpenAI, right? We realized that you can do a lot more. For example, with Gen AI, you can actually recommend the manager to do more, right? For example, okay, I think based on the sales, you need to open your stores slightly earlier, for example. Or based on the sales, I think you need to upsell the bread better because you are trending behind compared to other stores nearby, right? So those kind of analytics, even from headquarters, we cannot do it ourselves.
Yeah, like on a per store, daily basis, it's like too much volume.
Too much volume. Excel cannot support that, right?
Let's talk about the Indonesian startup scene.
Yeah.
How has it evolved since you got started? Where are things at today?
I would say that in terms of Indonesian startup scene, it seems like tech-enabled is a better bet than tech company in Indonesia. I think in Indonesia, especially with SaaS company or software as a service company, it doesn't seem to be working well in here. Why is that the case? Simply because in SaaS company, your biggest competitor is not other SaaS company, but it's actually the minimum wage of Indonesia. In Indonesia, minimum wage is I think around $300 per month, and that's in Jakarta. I think if you go to say Central Java, it's like around $150 per month, right? So when people want to pay for software, they don't want to pay more than minimum wage, more than 2 or 3 people of minimum wage per month, right?
So your ceiling on what a SaaS,
what you can
software
charge
as a service, could charge is actually
very low. So compared to say in the US, SaaS company, one good manager can be like 100K salary.
Yeah.
Having a better SaaS, people are more than willing to pay 100K for SaaS. But then in Indonesia, nobody's going to pay 100K for SaaS unless you're a very big enterprise. So that is why they realize that tech, in terms of revenue, is a lot harder than say US, right, or Europe. But
there's also such a huge population. I mean, upwards of 250 plus million.
That is why tech-enabled is better. Because
so tell me more about tech-enabled.
Tech-enabled is like Kopi Kenangan, right? They are doing retail, right, or more conventional businesses. And then they use technology to make it better. Like in our case, we use our technology to make people go into the store, and we operate the store better using Jarvin, right? Hence, our unit economics is better than, say, the incumbent or the global coffee chain. So I think businesses like that, right, has been attracting quite a lot of attention in Indonesia. For example, I think there are right now a lot of skincare businesses that are being funded by VC. And why is that? Because now instead of just going to modern retail, they can simply sell it online. So e-commerce as a medium, or their own website as a medium as well, where they can generate higher revenue than global brand.
Yeah, so you're advocating for basically a bridge or some kind of cross between traditional and tech instead of just
a fully
pure tech
company.
And maybe that also is one of the reasons why Sequoia was interested in something that you were investing in.
And Sequoia has been investing in tech-enabled company as well. Like for example, I think in China, they invested in Haiti. I don't know whether you know that company. Right?
Tell us more.
Haiti is basically like the Starbucks of bubble tea in China. They, I think they have close to $1 billion of revenue today, right? So it's not something new for them to invest. They like growth, Sequoia.
Growth. You have to understand the market, understand where the growth channels are.
Yeah.
And within a market like Indonesia and Southeast Asia, probably a faster channel to growth is actually something that's more of a tech-enabled versus a pure play tech, at least today.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And do you see that changing? Where do you see the landscape going in the next 5 years or the next 10 years?
I think in the next 5 years, the theme is still the same. Why? Because if you read some of the reports from World Bank, there are more than 50 million middle classes going into the economy in the next 5 to 10 or 5 years, right? So there's a lot of, those are your potential customers, right? Whether you are doing skincare or coffee. So I think the trend of consumption, intersection between tech and conventional business will still be there in the next 5 years, as opposed to say going full technology. Yeah.
And Kopi Kenangan is one of these inspiring stories, rare, of an Indonesian-born company going international. In the way that you've done it is an inspiration to others. I'm curious as to your perspective is, where is the limit? I mean, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking of just dominating across Asia? Will we see you actually in Dubai or perhaps in New York or in another market one of these days? How are you thinking about your ambition?
I think if your ambition is to go global, there is no point of capping it to Southeast Asia, right? It takes as much effort to open in Philippines as it is to open, say, in Dubai, right? It's just a matter of which one comes first, and in this case, I think proximity becomes relevant, right? Proximity and opportunity, and I think maybe opportunity will be more relevant here. If we see a missing gap in the market, then maybe it's a good market for us to enter. And then, in terms of proximity, if we have to open in the US, then it might take a lot more effort to say open in, Philippines.
I'd like you to, for a moment, put an investor hat on and help us with advice that you might give to somebody who's maybe starting out in their career, has gathered about $10,000 in investable money, and wants to pick, an asset or something that they would, put their money into. What would you recommend to that person? Is there something that really strikes you that you think people should focus on these days?
Okay, so I would say that I'm slightly biased because my first rule of thumb in investing is that I don't want to look at it too much, and I don't want to worry too much about it. So daily trading of stocks is definitely a no-go. Crypto is definitely a no-go because you need to be very fast and nimble on buying, selling. So I would say that I like the easy investment where I can just sleep at night and focus on my business. So I would recommend investing in S&P 500. Because interesting fact, not many hedge fund or investor have been able to beat S&P 500 over a extended period of time, like a decade or so. And my investment horizon would be in decades, not in months. Right, so I would say that the easiest way to invest is S&P 500. Easy,
invest
simple.
In the S&P 500, something very safe, which is interesting coming from a founder that risked it all and did crazy things on the business side. But I must say,
you must balance your life.
You must balance. I was going to say it's not something so untypical. You would find that founders are actually have so much of their equity tied up in such a risky endeavor that when they're actually looking to invest outside of that, they look for things that are much less risky, just to kind of balance things out.
You can have every single thing of your life to be risky. Right? You can have sleep if that's the case.
And so along those lines, if you were to actually allocate a portfolio, and you were thinking, okay, I have that 10,000. How would you split it up? Would you put it all into the S&P 500, or would you split it up and maybe pick some things that might give you more potential return?
Well, I think today I will just do 70-30, 70 bond and 30 S&P.
Tell us more. So what's your take on bonds?
On bonds, simply when the interest is high, bond is the yield is pretty attractive, and then when interest rate gets cut, then the bond value will go up. Right, so that's why I think today 70 bond and 30 S&P will be a good bet. But then if it's the other way around, where it's a low interest environment, and then S&P is not as high as it is today, then I would probably switch it around. Yeah, so it really depends on where we are today, right?
I'd love to ask you some quick fire questions, if you don't mind. What's your go-to coffee order?
Americano.
Decaf, yes or no?
No.
Coffee with one celebrity, dead or alive, who would it be?
Chris Hemsworth.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Tip for making the best brew at home?
Go get a V60.
V60.
Yeah.
What's one thing people get wrong about running a coffee business?
They focus too much on ambience, less the taste.
Best business advice you've ever received?
Common purpose.
Common purpose.
Common purpose.
Tell me a little bit more.
So I spoke with the founder of Hyperlocalization. Hyperlocalization, I think, is the biggest hot pot chain in the world, right? And I asked him, how come Hyperlocalization is doing very well, not just in China but globally as well? And he said there's this Chinese proverbs, right? Something along the line of common purpose, meaning that if you are in a war and the generals don't have the same common purpose as the emperor, then you're done. No way you can win the war. So you have to make sure that everyone from top to bottom have the same common purpose, then you can win a war. So it's the same in Kopi Kenangan as well, right? We are the only company in Indonesia where we give area manager ESOP, or employee stock option plan, right?
So they have shares in the company.
They have shares in a company, right? Because I want them to be incentivized to make the company do well, right? So that is why it is very important for our people on the ground to have the same common purpose as myself, the CEO and co-founder.
Common purpose.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Edward, for being with me on Money Moves.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Edward has global ambitions for Kopi Kenangan. Do you think his style of grab-and-go coffee with an Indonesian flair would work in your country? Let me know in the comments.